Problem 612 and 615 are substantially similar, so what I'm going to do is work through 612 and leave you 615 to practice on your own. So what we have here in the spreadsheet are the anticipated annual activity for one particular product. That's the strawberry cheesecake for the Cheesecake Shop, as well as the cost for direct materials and direct labor per unit of strawberry cheesecake. But then the overall overhead costs, so the total overhead of $421,000 for all of the products that it has. So not just strawberry, but all of the cheesecakes. So what we're going to do here is look at develop a way of allocating overhead and then applying the overhead cost to strawberry cheesecake and see how that affects its total cost, in particular on a per unit basis. So once we take the estimated total overhead, what the Cheesecake Shop has done is split that into 5 different activity pools, as we see here: materials ordering, materials inspection, equipment setup, quality control, and other. And in each of these activities, it is associated a cost driver that it believes is influencing that portion of the overhead costs. So the materials ordering, for instance, would be influenced by the number of purchase orders. So in column D, what we have is the estimated total activity of the cost driver, so that for each purchase order, we have a certain amount of materials ordering that would take the form of overhead. So in column F, what I'm going to do is construct the overhead rate per unit of activity for each of the 5 cost pools. So here is our predetermined overhead rate. For each of these will just be the quotient of the estimated overhead costs divided by the estimated activity of cost driver. So for materials ordering, this would be $9 per order. We can copy these down using the appropriate cell referencing, but then we want to make sure that we have the appropriate descriptor here. So it's $9 per order, $200 per receiving report, $35 per setup, $23 per inspection, and 5 cents per direct labor. Make sure it's per direct labor dollar. So it really is important. I want to highlight this here. It's really important that each of these is assigned, is the descriptor that we're using here. And so in that regard, it's not $35, for instance, for equipment setup. It's $35 per setup. So that when we calculate the overhead costs, we are sure to multiply this by the appropriate activity. And I would say even here for POR, this is where I would want to merge the cells so that we have this accordingly. So over here in columns F and G, it's $9 per order, per purchase order, $200 per receiving report, and so forth. Now in Excel we can only multiply by the dollar amount, but so what has to be implied is how much we're going to actually be multiplying this by. So in the case of strawberry cheesecake, we would introduce the volume of activity, so the activity of the cost driver, and so on. So for strawberry cheesecake, we have 100 orders, I'm going to repeat these over here. We have 100 orders, 60 receiving reports, 30 setups, 150 inspections, and then 39,000 of direct labor cost. So in part B, when we're asked to calculate the overhead assigned to this particular product, we would take $9 per purchase order multiplied by the number of purchase orders. And in this case, we would have $900 for strawberry cheesecake. Copy these down. And we will have in total $19,350. Now, an alternative way that we could have done that calculation is through the use of the sum product command. So in sum product, what we would do is take these dollar amounts as one array and then multiply that by another array as long as we have the spreadsheet set up accordingly. And we see that we end up with the same result. So we have $19,350 of overhead. So overhead applied to all strawberry cheesecakes. And if so maybe I'll undo that and just have it like such. So then on a per unit basis, we would take the 19,350 and then divide by the number of strawberry cheesecakes that we plan to have. So in other words, we have 19,350 and divide that by 19,500 volume, and just under $1 per unit. So then the total unit product cost, so this is per unit, so overhead per unit. So then our total product cost would include the overhead amount as well as our direct materials and our direct labor. In this case, it's $12.99. So now we've worked through this to calculate this on a form of activity-based costing. Now, as an alternative, we could have done this using traditional overhead pool. So the traditional method could be any different source. In this case, it was direct labor dollars. So finding the POR here, we would take the estimated total overhead of 421,000 and divide by the estimated direct labor cost of 2 million. And so we'd end up with amount per direct labor dollar. So just over 21 cents per direct labor dollar. Now, looking at the strawberry activity, so if we copy the strawberry activity descriptors over here, in this case, we want to know how many direct labor dollars were associated with strawberries, and that was 39,000. so that when we take the product of these two, 21 cents per direct labor dollar, and multiply by 39,000 direct labor dollars, we get $8,209.50 as our overhead amount. We divide that number by the number of units we have, and we end up getting, so this would be 8,200, and this would be the same sort of heading here, overhead applied to all strawberry cheesecakes, and then this would be the overhead per unit. Well, notice that this 42 cents per unit is less than half of the overhead per unit under activity-based costing. So there's something about the production of strawberry cheesecake that is, that's not being picked up by a volume-based measure like direct labor dollars, and that level of difficulty is being picked up through activity-based costing. And we see that here with the receiving reports. So the receiving reports are more than half of the overhead, and yet that's not going to be described at all in the form of direct labor dollars. Now notice that when we look at our total unit cost here, so again we can just copy that formula down. Well, now we would have our overhead per unit, and then our direct material and direct labor costs as well. So, the difference between $12.42 and $12.99 doesn't appear to be very much. But notice that that's the direct materials and direct labor are not going to be different. But the issue here is that the overhead is, and activity-based costing, if we go from a starting point of a volume-based measure, traditional measure of direct labor cost, and move to activity-based costing, what we'll end up doing is charging more for the strawberry cheesecake, and more appropriately, charging more. Under a traditional measure, it's likely that we're undercosting strawberry cheesecake, and correspondingly, likely undercosting it and undercharging for it, and perhaps overcharging for some other products.